George, Phil, Lynn, Fred, and Jonathan. Thanks very much. Go on down. I next would like to introduce the mobile medicine panel, which is going to be moderated by Dr. Stephen Friend. Dr. Friend is the co-founder and director of Sage Bionetworks. Stephen is a disruptor of the highest order. He has changed the model for genetics research, cancer drug development, and most recently, research with smartphones. Stephen is one of the chief architects of Apple's Research Kit and its recently released 5 smartphone research apps that in 2 months have enrolled over 60,000 research participants nationally. Stephen is now going to apply his disruption to the mobile medicine panel.
All right. In trying to think how to convey things and make it so it's somewhat interesting, we've chosen on this panel, which is about mobile health, to keep the intro short and to be joined by someone from the UK. We'll see how this works. But here's the other thing we're going to try. I spent 8 years at Merck, and during that time, it was the heyday of the there is no but, there's only and. Did anyone live through this phase? And actually, buts are good. It just wasn't in then. And the point I'm trying to make is that actually, if we can get into a real dialogue here that's more of a point, counterpoint, I don't mean just to be confrontational, but I think if we can have a way where people are seeing that there are actually almost always 2 sides to a story, I think it'll be more fun. And so I think if we start with introductions, I'll end and keep them so that they aren't too long. But some have a sense of who it is that's sitting on these chairs. I think that would be great. And I'll as moderator, once we go to Max, we'll go to me. So Tim, do you want to start?
Sure. I'll try and keep it short. And this is my first time at BUT, so we'll see how this goes. But I'm the COO of TouchCare, and appreciate the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what we're doing. But it's really pretty simple. We allow a provider to connect with the patient to do face-to-face video consults on pretty much any device, mobile device, as well as tablets. We're backed by Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina, Fortress Investment Group, a big private equity firm here in New York. We launched the first service back in September, partnered with a number of academic healthcare institutions, one being Mount Sinai, who've been great partners. Since then, we've launched with a number of large healthcare institutions across the U.S., independent practices, as well as solo practitioners. We're a bunch of mobile consumer entrepreneurs, and we got excited about this business when we saw MD Live and Doctors on Demand, and the convenient access that those services provided. But as parents and as kids of older adults, we hated the fact that we were getting connected with these doctors we didn't know, would probably never see again after we got those prescriptions, and really wanted that same convenient access with our own providers who we know, trust, and provide that continuity of care. So today you can go to the App Store, download an app as a provider, set up a profile, connect with your patients in the same way as you connect with a friend on Facebook or a colleague on LinkedIn, and literally be up and running doing HIPAA-secure video consults in minutes. From a use case perspective, we're seeing it all across the board, everything from primary care and using it to make it so the patients don't have to come in for low acuity illnesses, take off work, make the trip, sit in the waiting room. Big areas on managing patients with chronic care, chronic diseases, improving compliance. We've got one provider that's doing about 20% of his consults now in managing chronic disease patients. We're seeing a lot in urgent care, actually, where they're reducing or using it as a customer acquisition tool to pull patients into the network and get them exposed to primary care, OBGYNs, ENTs, and get people access to more convenient care, but also more appropriate care to keep them from coming into the ER. EDs and geriatric is a big area as well, following up after their release and trying to make sure they're in compliance and really prevent those trips back into the ER. So that's my shortness. Right.
Okay, I'll try to keep it short. First, Avi and Ray, thank you very much for the invitation. We're collaborating at MC10 very closely with the university and made an announcement yesterday, as many of you heard last night at dinner. I come from the semiconductor background in what's called connectivity, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, GPS.
Just make sure that Peter saw who was here.
Oh, okay. You all right, Peter? Spent 15 years there and left that business, and then was asked to come over to MC10. Can everybody see this? Well, that's good, because if you can't see it, you can't feel it. And if you can't feel it, you'll wear it. And if you wear it, we can collect data from the body that's pertinent to certain disease states that you may have. And we're collaborating with the university and the medical center to help solve chronic diseases, neurological diseases like Parkinson's, and manage these better, and make sure that the efficacy of the treatments are working, whether it be a medical device or a drug. And if you can take these devices and put them on the right spot, we all heard the term wearables. Well, semiconductors make that possible. If you can put them on the right part of the body or in multiple locations, and you're not constrained to the wrist, you can collect an awful lot of valuable data. But as Jonathan just said, and he led this very well. Jonathan, I don't know where you are, but you gave me a great intro. We collect so much data, but that's not what's important. It's the actionable data that comes out of all of this, of the algorithms and the multiple locations on the body, so that we can affect change, and so that the doctors can manage over time how they're implementing the treatment. We change over time. The treatment needs to change over time as well, whether it's a new device, whether it's an increased dosage of a certain medicine, or a lessening of a medicine, or the cocktail has to be changed. So we're teaming up with pharma, medical devices companies, research groups like Ray's, and like Henry. We work with the data folks over at the University of Rochester. It's very, very exciting for me, coming from semiconductor, helping to solve and manage some of these disease states. I don't care if you're from the right or the left in politics. I don't think our government's going to solve a lot of the healthcare issues. I think it's up to us and disruptive technologies, and that's what we're all about.
Okay, I'm Todd Scherer. I'm the CEO of the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research. Obviously, coming from the direction of Parkinson's disease, not technology. What we see in Parkinson's disease is a great opportunity to utilize technology to improve our assessment of the disease. It's a chronic disease. It's a 24-hour-day, 7-day-a-week disease. But currently, the way the disease is assessed and evaluated is very sporadically and very subjectively. People like Ray will put their patients through tests that involve touching your nose and putting your hands like this, and then they'll give a score. And they'll do that every 3-6 months, and that's how we score a new therapy or the effectiveness of current therapies. And we think that utilizing technologies can really improve on that and get a more day-to-day assessment of the symptoms.
Do that over a video link.
Well, he does that. He does that by video link, but actually that's still not very precise, right? There's technology that can make it much more precise.
I'm just trying to get you to buy his product, that's all.
Well, we've worked with Stephen on the Apple app, the Research Kit app. There's one that Ray and Stephen developed, Empower, that's now for Parkinson's disease. And we also have a collaboration with Intel to try to utilize wearable technology as well. Just to start the kind of butt part of it, I think this is all potential. A lot of people have very cool devices, but I don't think we've actually proven yet that it is able to assess a disease in a better way than the clinician can just through their actual current assessment. So I think that's where we have to prove that in order for it to be really used.
See, we're getting shorter as we go down the list here. I'm Peter Tippett. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Verizon. I don't know if any of you ever heard of Verizon. Anybody here heard of so why would Verizon have a chief medical officer is the usual sort of question. We feel like we're in the health business in order to be an enabler. We want to raise all boats. We want all these guys to succeed. We want to speed up this transition towards, towards mobile health, towards digital health, towards, we can't wait for for all this. On a personal level, somebody like Verizon spends more than $4 billion a year on our own employees' healthcare costs. And as a company that legacy pushes 100 years old, there's not been a quarter in which the per person cost went down over the quarter before. Not one quarter, right? So despite people year after year, month after month, program after program coming in saying, have I got a deal for you? Let me show you how, all trends in healthcare have been increasing cost, right? I'm a scientist. All trends in science have been increasing quality. They haven't been science around decreasing costs, right? And that's kind of a big mistake, I think. The trend in our economics, anybody here ever seen a Petri dish, right? So you probably learned that you put a single bacteria in a Petri dish, it turns into 2, and then it turns into 4, and then it turns into 8, and then this is the exponential growth. If you plot the growth, it makes a very nice exponential curve until it quits growing, at which point we say it runs out of substrate. Well, if healthcare costs keep growing, we'll run out of substrate, which means money, which is all cash on the planet will go to healthcare, and there won't be any left for anything else. So somehow you have to be an ER doctor to be on this stage, so me too. Famous thing we say in the ER is that all bleeding eventually stops, right? It could be because you're dead. That's one way, or it could be because we've actually taken something and done it right and turned the problem around. We're in the middle of turning that problem around. So Verizon is organized around actually getting doctors to share data and with patients. That's not because we're going to produce a PHR. We just want to make the PHR actually work. We want to remove the the regulatory impediments. So we've got all kinds of HIPAA-compliant ways to help organizations along. We want to remove the mobility requirements. So we've got all kinds of ways to get companies involved. We've got over 100 companies who we've enabled in the network sort of a way. We give grants. We've got a foundation. We spend a huge amount of energy and money on healthcare-related projects in the foundation. We got a venture fund. We've invested in 7 health startups in this sort of space. We've got an incubator. We've invented a universal identity program that works worldwide. With that program, we digitally signed 380 million prescriptions in the last year. Now, does anybody know this? It's not like we put the Verizon name on it. We're not trying to do that. We're trying to enable the infrastructure. We've got innovation centers to help foster these along. We have something we call the Powerful Answers Award. We give $3 million a year of money to people in the healthcare space that just, if they've got a heartbeat and a good idea, that's the minimum, right? So we're here to help.
Excellent. I then want to turn to our guest that's coming in over the wires from the UK. Let's see if this magic works. Max, have you heard what we're talking about? We're doing 3 minutes or so on who we are, and then we're going to go into some dialectics. So, okay. Max, can you hear us? And we'll tell whether we can hear you. Max? Yeah, Max? Exactly. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay. So did you hear 3-minute intro? We're going to come back to, we're going to go into a dialogue going back and forth. So Max, if you can do three minutes so people can know your background, and then we'll start our dialogue. Go ahead, Max.
Fantastic. Right. Yeah, so about me, well, my background actually is in mathematics and in techniques like machine learning, business processes, my interest lies exploiting the potential of consumer technology such as telephone, smartphones, pretty much whatever gadgets that people have around that are on their person pretty much all the time or easily accessible. The idea is to use these consumer technologies to objectively record neurological disorders like that. So, for instance, if we look at smartphones these days, they have embedded movement sensors that can pick up gait disturbance, so they can be used to quantify postural instability. They have built-in GPS devices, so they can quantify patterns and mobility. They include touch screens, so they can set up really simple screen tap test dexterity and reaction. All of these things are very, very relevant to us. One of my special interests that they called micro. So if you look at a smartphone in your pocket, I mean, you might not realize, I think it's easy to overlook just how rather amazing these devices are. They seem to have this substantial potential as these cheap, ubiquitous tools for rapid and remote symptom monitoring. And this is, I think, exactly, you know, it's an extraordinary opportunity, I think, to, if we can turn these devices into tools for getting data. You know, I think we could have a good chance at really changing the way in which we go about monitoring and collecting information, which is crucial to make scientific decisions. So our group is working with clinical labs worldwide, such as the Oxford Research Centre and Ray experimental. We have several ongoing trials addressing the problem of large-scale monitoring of disease, the natural history of disease, in Parkinson's, with up to thousands of individuals, and actually continuously contributing real-time sensor data, Android data,
Verizon connection.
and that's posted out to John Hopkins. So our aim in our group is this very hard work, a very difficult job, I think, of building validated algorithms which can be used to convert sensor data into usable outcomes for medical research as possible. Well, that's me. What I hope to do then is for this discussion contribute aspect.
Clearly an AT&T connection.
Exactly. So Max, that's a helpful intro. It was a little hard to hear, so if you can adjust the microphone. I spent a year working on a DARPA project with Max, and you can just move that microphone up, and we'll hope that I'll make a point to engage you in the dialogue, even though you're calling in. And thanks very much for the intro. So just a real brief intro on myself. Stephen Friend. I did not come in from the telecom industry. I had trained as a medic, and then went in and got interested in bioinformatics, formed a biotech company, Rosette Informatics, then spent time at Merck, 8 years in the pharma industry. And then about 6 years ago, got interested in how do we get this information that is coming in so that the data and the insights are shared in ways that actually could lead to things that would impact patients. So much of the data is siloed these days, so it's pretty hard to get to the data. What kind of incentive reward structure? So we set up a nonprofit research institute called Sage Bionetworks. And about 2 years ago, we were funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to ask, what would happen if you could engage individuals as equal partners with their physician in clinical studies? So I'm not talking about wild and crazy citizen science. What I'm talking about is how do you make it feel like an equal partnership between the data and the insights that a patient has and what physicians are interested. Could you come up with a way to change the sort of feudal sense of subjects in clinical trials to something that actually felt as if their trial, instead of our trial, their trial? And so I call this participant-centered trials. And to do that, we thought one strategy was to use app-based approaches, and we started working down that route. And then you may know that about a year ago, began working with Apple. I spent the last 8 months working half my time at Apple, half the time at Sage. And in March, at the Apple launch, Research Kit was announced, which is a adjacency to Health Kit. Health Kit allows individuals to pull in data. Research Kit says, can I make it so that actually we can collect very large sets of information off pervasive computing devices? And what would happen if you did that? And so that's the background that I bring to it. So I think if you listen to Peter and Todd, you listen to what Scott and Tim and Max are talking about, I feel as if we're at this paradoxical stage. And that's why I think this point-counterpoint could work between some things that are totally absurdly interesting right? And then the practical issue that actually the industry in which this is being now sort of infiltrating, inseminating, has been recalcitrant, hard to change, very much with some of the comments that were earlier. So you have this dichotomy between some things that are very likely to fundamentally change how it is that people engage with themselves, with others, with doctors. I would say the difference between 3 years ago and now is that there's something on the flesh, right? There's something, but it sure isn't enough. So I think to start the questioning, and maybe going to Peter, yourself, and to Scott on this, for those who, when you go and you have something that just knocked you over, and you go, this really could work, what do you do to the jaundiced people that you have to go in front of who've said, yeah, you've been telling about this for a while. So do you ever run into those jaundiced people? And when you run into them, how do you make it sound, or how do you, what is it that you can use that allows people, this isn't just another year of people with hype, or is it? And then maybe to Scott, and then we'll go around.
I've raised a dozen rounds of venture money in my life. I've started up several startups that you'd all recognize. Norton Antivirus is me, and several others. Anything, we heard about it from Brailer this morning, we heard about it in the questions in the middle. Things that have a horizon more than 4 or 5 years away don't work for the financial model, right? That financial investment model does not work that way. One of the articles I read recently about why Google is doing well is that the founders are still running the place. It's not being run by the finance people, right? And if companies or processes become finance-driven, then they are constrained to iterative change. They don't really have a choice, right? They're constrained to iterative change. So I believe that the significant change, although we all like our iterative changes, this notion of enabling the doctor-patient relationship, to my mind, I like it. I'm a doctor, but I think that's really narrow-minded thinking. I think, that healthcare is going to become a patient brand relationship. When was the last time you went to a travel agent, right? You don't have a travel agent relationship anymore, right? Fundamentally, a doctor is a consultant, and fundamentally, consultants get disintermediated by the knowledge in software and networks of services that provide the value. And medicine, I don't think, is any different than any other body of knowledge. I don't think it's any more complex. It obviously is complex, don't get me wrong. But I think that we're going to wind up with someone somewhere that swoops in with value that's outside enough of the system. It's probably mobile. I call this big SOMO code, big data, social, mobile, and cloud. Those are the
Wait,
four.
say that again so people got that. It's called what?
Big SOMO clo. Big data, social, mobile, cloud. Those are the 4 infrastructure trends of our times. This is a mobile panel, but really you couldn't get mobility without big data. You couldn't get either one of them without cloud. All of them are working together, and social media is obviously a driver that's enabled by all of this and is a driver of the time. Those are the drivers that are enabling the massive change. And so I expect something to swoop in more from the outside that I want to ask about the bump on my toe, or whether I'd better take the insulin a little later than a little sooner, or whether or not, all the myriad of things that the doctor-nurse-patient sort of relationship take care of. The vast majority of that stuff could happen over a video link, or a telephone link, or a chat session, or checking in with a community of people that sort of give you these clues and get you steered in the right direction. So I'd like to imagine that trigger that gets the foothold that becomes the Facebook of medicine.
Sounds like a Buckminster Fuller.
By the way, I don't have that trigger. It's not. Yeah. But if you, I'm happy to help.
Yeah, it sounds like the Buckminster Fuller concept that the change is going to come from the outside.
There's a ton of change coming from the inside, but there's got to be something more fundamental happening here than
any counterpoints on that? That was, or you want to skip?
I don't know if it's a counterpoint or if I'm a but.
Butts are okay. I always say everything before the but is a lie. I like you, but.
I think the key to answer Todd's question is, the patient goes into the doctor's office, 3-4 times a year, and they get the score. And I think what's critical is to use the technology that's evolving now so you can get this clinical fidelity outside of the doctor's office in advance of the visit. And so then make use of it in everyday life. And we're all historically used to or know someone that's been hooked up to a machine, a sleep study. Well, where do they put you? They put you in this room with these wires hanging and they want to see you sleep. I'm not going to sleep. But if I'm wearing one of these little devices and I can get the data in my own bed and they can see if I was in deep sleep, if I wasn't sleeping, did I get up, did I go to the bathroom, what's going on during the night, I think that's the actionable data. Not just did I take 10,000 steps, but what kind of steps were they? Were they good steps? Was my gait balance and motion okay? I think this is the actionable information that you need outside the lab.
That's the work that has to be done to convert the hype to it being used.
Well, we'll demonstrate it to you later.
Because
we have it.
Well, I think you talked about some of the roadblocks, and a doctor is very busy, and they don't necessarily want to be inundated with more data unless it's going to be useful and make the appointment more efficient. So I think you may have it, but you then have to do the work to get it accepted and integrated, right? And I think that's going to be a challenge, particularly in complex diseases that the doctors already don't have enough time to really assess what's going on with the patient.
I'm going to expand on that and then throw it back, which is, so we've been, one of the apps that was built out was a Parkinson app. It's one that we worked very closely with Ray Dorsey with. It's one that now we're really thrilled to be working with Todd and the Michael J. Fox Foundation on. But we're now getting all this data back, thousands of people coming in, tens of thousands of comments, the type of data you would like to have. And the point I want to make is we asked the patients what was making them better or worse. And we figured they might talk about medication, they might talk about sleep. But actually, the comments that came back really freaked us out. There were comments such as, the question was, what's making your disease better? What's making it worse? These are real comments that came back. One person said, race relations in America is making my Parkinson work. Another person said, I got a chance to see something beautiful happen with my pet. As a physician, if someone was saying that while I'm trying to do my visit and trying to assess, does this person need a new medication, my tendency would have been to say, excuse me, I'm trying to help you, okay? And not to listen to the patient, okay? What happens if those comments actually are making the disease better and worse? What happens if the ebb and flow and some of the things that are most important in diseases are actually stress, how one feels? The reason I bring it up is that I think Todd and actually several of you suggested this. There may be insights that are actually valuable to listen to. Are the doctors ready to listen to that? Are the regulators interested in listening to it? I will tell you, the patients are. Okay? So what are we going to do with this? Where's the wall going to start cracking?
Yeah, I mean, I just look at the way that the healthcare system is set up today, right? You go into your primary care doctor and you spend 30, 45 minutes, you get the time set up, and so much happens between, every year, every 2 years. And I think, what we're seeing and, from a consumer perspective is how do you increase the touch points, right? Get down to 5 to 7 minute interactions and do it with more frequency and get consumers more engaged into the healthcare system on a continuous basis. I think we need to see a lot more of those types of dramatic changes.
Before I go to something I wanted to ask Scott, Max, if you can hear, and again, if you can bring your microphone, it will help. For those who are in this room dreaming that these data streams are going to be at all intelligible. You spent, I think it was 10,000 hours in the media lab comparing voice recordings with I mean, so he did the really hard work to do this anchoring. What are you most worried about that needs to happen that may not happen? So Max, can you give us, from your perspective, it's a polite way of saying where do you think people are dreaming with the flow of data that's coming in? Any lessons that you've learned that are worth bringing up? Max, can you try with your microphone?
Yep, I hear you. So just to restate your question, you're asking me what is this data going to be like? How useful is it going to be? What can we do with it? That kind of thing. Yes.
Yep.
Obviously, those are very big questions, and I can't answer all of them straight away. That's why we're doing this. But I would say one of the things is that we need to understand things like context. So we need to be able to disambiguate different kinds of signals. Although we have vast amounts of data, and we can get second by second data. We can get accelerometry, say, at 100 hertz. And that's incredible, but it only tells you about movement. Now, movement, of course, under certain circumstances, we know is extremely important. So if we set up a test in which somebody is doing a particular movement, and we know that they're doing that movement, then the accelerometry data is fabulous. It's this beautiful, clear picture of someone's state of ability to move.
Yep.
But if you but of course you don't know actually what most people are doing when they're going about their daily business. You have to infer a lot of that, and so as a result, we need an awful lot of intelligence put into things like it's in my discipline it's called segmentation, and it's called things like quality control and filtering. So a lot of that is about trying to sort out the wheat from the chaff, really. It's what data is going to be useful and what data is probably too confounded to be useful. So if anything, what I would say is that really what we need is I think it's fair to say this. It may not seem obvious to you if you're not in that discipline, but those sorts of problems are not considered to be problems that the academic community really cares about. And it's unfortunate because the academic community are where all there are some fantastic brains there that could be turned to this problem of trying to make this trying to analyze this vast stream of data. But they're really only interested in the sort of the publishable nuggets of information.
Yep.
So our real challenge, I think, is to try to persuade those who have the real skills to turn this data into something meaningful, that it is worth doing, even though there aren't any obvious immediate academic rewards in it.
Yep.
So in a way, what we're having to do is to build up a discipline, and actually at the same time trying to, I suppose, persuade people of its importance.
Yep.
Because that's the only way
Yep.
that you can then get the funding bodies on side. You can get the get the bright PhD students who want to come and work in this area. It's very tough. I mean, it is tough going.
Max,
this research area is a very nascent field.
Yeah, Max,
we don't know an awful lot about it.
Yeah, Max.
There is a lot that we know it's got enormous potential. It must do.
Yeah, Max.
But I would say that we need in a way we need an exercise to shift perceptions, for example, amongst engineers, that this is a problem that's worth working on, despite its difficulty, despite how hard it is.
Okay.
The sort of results that we're going to get from this are going to be hard won. Let's face it.
Thanks, Max. Okay, so dual questions going to Scott and then to Todd. I think this issue that Max brought up about making sense of the data is a serious one. It's not. There's a part to it about the pipelines for curation. And then there is the aspects of analysis and this issue of signal and noise versus our absurdly clunky ways that we validate. Scott, you're going to have some pretty cool data flowing out, hopefully from lots of those Band-Aid type sensors. You think it's going to come from academia? Do you think it's going to come from, how are you going to get the people who you need to look at it? You're not going to hire them inside, are you?
No, and that's why we announced a collaboration. We're going to work very closely with Henry on this. It was interesting to me before Henry talked, just orthogonally to what you're talking about here, GPS. I mean, that's the background I have. Think about all the location information and what were you doing, and were you doing something enjoyable, tying that to gait balance and motion and some of the feedback. It's going to be very difficult. You're going to have massive amounts of data, and you're going to have to do the analytics and the correlation, et cetera, and see if you can pull the signal out of the noise. Right now, there's a motivation for the specific disease states to prove efficacy, to prove the compliance is working, and that, and we're going to be paid for performance, if you were. You know, is it working? So there's an economical motivation where we're going to play, and academia is going to play, the pharma companies are going to pay, and the medical devices. And those are our partners right now. As we move forward, I think there'll be lots of other constituencies in the mix here pulling this all out, including academia. I mean, they just received $100 million in building out a data center, probably one of the leading in the world. And so the focus is there. And I think the benefits will just come in places we never even anticipated.
Just to add, I guess, some comments. I think coming back to something that was discussed this morning, which I think is so important in this regard, is the openness of the data. Because we had a great example we did, which is more of a pilot of having the data consented in a way that it was open. And actually, this was with Max, where we got some of his pilot data, and we just announced a challenge and had hundreds of groups working on the data, because a lot of the experts in the data usage can't get their hands on these valuable data sets because it's all proprietary. And the patients, this is our experience so far with the Empower, they're happy to consent to make the data available. So I think that's a key feature, and I do think, you know, having the analysis be paired with the topic expert is also important, so that we focus people on what questions may be most relevant.
Brayler mentioned this morning, big regulatory changes that need to happen and so on, and I think that's true. I think that would help. HIPAA is a big impediment. FDA is a big impediment. You know, the regulatory state licensing for doctors is a big impediment. There's all these things that are true. But when you look at it from the viewpoint of something that's going to be disruptive, how can you create enough disruptive pathway to allow the disruption to happen? So you both came up with one of the disruptive wedges, and that is patient consent. If the patient consents, you don't need HIPAA. Right? So if we can build a system, one of the things we've done at Verizon is built this thing I mentioned, is universal identity. The notion of universal identity is we're going to give it away to everybody in the country. And one of the things it has in it is the ability for someone to say, it's okay for my daughter, my good daughter, or let me do it this way, my good son, who's in New York right now, to have access to my data, to share that access, and so on, right? But not my bad daughter, who's in whatever, right? To give permission. And to have a sort of a nationwide, open, free, available permission system that says, I give permission for my information to be used in the following way. If anybody wants that information about my mom's permission, there's a place to have it, right? And if she gives the permission and you can trust the thread and it's properly digitally signed and it meets all the HIPAA requirements, then all of a sudden we build a system that makes it possible for my mom to share her data without talking to 3,000 companies who want it. And without each of them having to get independent permission on each of those things. So those systems like that are some of the things that the HIPAA-compliant data centers, the ability to get things going along. These are some of the things that we're trying to do that just, we think if we can get the wedges that are already available more enabled, then people can come along. The other one I just really have to encourage people about is, as a scientist, I've been, and as a doctor, we've all been focused on quality, on finding things on that motion data that makes the patient better. I got it. That we spent hundreds of years doing science that way, and that's good. But if you want to make money and move fast and disrupt something, find something that's got equal quality that's cheaper.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Find something, a different way to do whatever it is
Exactly.
that saves the company money, and sell it to the person that's going to save the money.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Make that the driver.
Yeah.
And that will work almost no matter what. It doesn't work for governments very well. You can't talk them into saving money. But you can talk everybody else into saving money.
I want to go back to the wedge to highlight something, and then I want to throw something back to Tim and Scott. This concept of consent and who owns the data and how it's shared is fun to watch it getting very right. You know, it's always been something, a puzzle, if I were to say. But I do think in the last year there have been some nice examples. For the Apple Research Kits, the first 5 apps came out with a part of the consent. It's actually an e-consent, so you don't have to be in someone's office. Really important. But that e-consent has a screen which says to the individual, do you want your data shared directly with the research investigators at this particular institute, or do you want to share it broadly? And we didn't know how it would go. We knew that giving the citizen, the participant, the right to choose was the right thing to do. What we have been amazed by, and I've been tracking this every week, is 3/4 of the patients are saying, I want that data shared broadly with qualified researchers around the world. That fundamentally, you talk about wedges, that fundamentally puts a wedge into the institution to the investigator that says, my postdocs have to get their papers out, then I will show you my data. It fundamentally, all of a sudden, just opened it up. Right? Just that simple thing. I think it fits very much with what you were doing. So then you have this data. Now comes the puzzle that I think I wanted to frame for Tim and Scott, because it has to do with starting new companies or more in the startup mode than existing companies, which is it is in the best interest of patients to have the equivalent of new components that are being tested. Let's say there's a symptom to look at pain, or there's a symptom to look at cognition. What you'd really like is to have the input data, the code that was used, the answer that was given to be available, because you will accelerate the adoption of a standard that our commercial world doesn't work that way. A company gets an investor, it says, I want to have my own proprietary algorithm. I don't want anyone to see that data. I want to run it through. I'm going to run my platform. So my question is, I think there's a way to actually have startup companies taking off from a different point for what's competitive, and having the data and having the ways of understanding some of that information be something that you have as a starting point, not as the nugget that hooks the VC in that keeps the data out. So is that pretty strange? Or do you think that companies who are interested in making an impact, startup companies, you're looking at a VC company, if someone came in and said, we're working in a world where the upstream part of understanding a symptom is being done in a pre-competitive sense, where we're sharing the data, we're sharing some of the components. Where does it get to the point where you can't start a company? Where is it that you'd be thrilled to start a company off a platform of pre-competitive space? Does that?
I don't know if I fully understand the question.
Maybe someone can interpret, because sometimes my questions can be in Stephenese.
I don't know that I understood it either, but I'll give it a shot.
All right, well, let me since both of you, let me just try one more iteration. Is there is a real benefit to patients if there is a way, which Medtronic does not do, which many companies, device companies, do not do, where you get to see this was the input data, this was the algorithm, this was the solution. That's a building ground which patients would say, I want to see it, I want other people to see it, because no one really knows what they're doing yet. So what I'm saying is, it's in the patient, it's in society's best interest to be able to have things that are usually locked up and locked up in a proprietary sense. And my question is, Is there a way to actually benefit society, benefit the patient, and still have something left if you're saying, I want to start a company up? And take your own device, and what are you thinking of doing with the data that comes off it?
Well, we're thinking about doing exactly what you're thinking about in conjunction with what you just discussed from Verizon's perspective and an investment. You've got to be able to show the VC, the investor, you can make money. If you're going to give everything away, then you might as well go get a grant and not VC money, because this is a for-profit initiative. So
do remember Bob Young and Red Hat, but keep going.
Okay, good point, well taken. But I think from our perspective, the data is hugely valuable. And we do want to open that up, as you just said, and get these outsiders coming in to play with the data. The question is, who owns the algorithm? They took your data. Do you charge them for the data, and then they own the outcome, and they go get funding? Because you gave it to them, does it come back to you, and then can you go leverage that against some of your devices? One of the things we're trying to do is go where the money is. So we're trying to team up with the pharma, the Pill Plus. We're trying to be a companion device to potentially a Medtronic, your example, so that they have an incentive to get more data and sell more of their equipment. I mean, I'm dancing around this because you've got to have profits. They've got to make money. We've got to make money. So it's not an easy thing. You give everything away.
This is the classic dilemma, right? You know, if you're going to use your own money for something, you've got to find a way to monetize your own money and data is what you've got nowadays. The disruptors come, I mean, the government put up the GPS system, and then a whole new industry started monetizing the new available data, let's call it, from that system. So I think there's going to be equivalent disruptors. It may be that I'm involved with an NIH project that the White House announced at the State of the Union. I'm blocking on the name of it, but it boils down to it's a 1 million person
Precision medicine.
It's a precision medicine.
Precision medicine.
Precision medicine. Thank you. I'm proper.
There'll be a new word you'll have to learn next year, but for this year, it's not personalized, it's precision.
Yes, precision medicine. So the idea of this is to get DNA sequences of 1 million people voluntarily. And of course, the DNA sequence is useless to know the genotype if you don't know the phenotype, right? And so does that person walk funny? Is it Audrey Hepburn or Katharine Hepburn, who everybody could see the tremor, and tell it, but nobody, you know, it was 8 years later before anybody figured out what that tremor really was. Anybody in the medical community, you guys could have figured it out a lot earlier, right? But to the extent that there's a Uber process system that says, tell you what, we're going to give everybody a genotype, and we're going to put it in this database, make it available to researchers. And we're going to tell everybody who gives their data that they have permission to offer any app data to the same system, and the permissioning is available there. If the people with the app or the device or whatever don't want to be part of the program, then they're not going to be part of the program. But there'll be a competition there where some people will say, the hell with it, I'll try and figure out how to make the money later. And they'll go for it. And so we will wind up with a disruptive wedge that comes because the people who are too constrained to getting their monetization narrowly defined right now won't play. But somebody in a similar space will. And we'll wind up with a ton of data. In fact, this one of the in the rooms we talk about this. People tend to think that 1 million person precision medicine project could well be the thing that opens up enough data from enough people with enough openness that makes the ball get rolling.
Tim, do you want to say anything last comments?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, if you look at the open web, right, anyone can crawl the web and index it, and it's open, it's freely available, but Google has found a way to make it actionable and make it useful in a way that nobody else has, right? So if you look at the medical data, it goes back to what I think we started this conversation on, how do you turn it into actionable data? So from a VC perspective, you know, I think they clearly would like to see as much proprietary data as possible, but at the same time, there's massive companies with incredible enterprise value that, you know, are built around these open ecosystems, and I think that's where we need to go as an industry. And I think there will be incredible enterprise value if we can get to
I would
that
just
point.
say that everybody with an app should ask their client, patient, whoever, that question that you pointed out. Is it okay? Would you please be willing to share this? And set a flag. You know, make that the rule.
Right. And then we have a really interesting problem. What are we going to do with that data?
That's a whole different question.
It's a beautiful one
right.
that I think is coming. All right, I think we're ready.
Can we open it up for questions?
Yeah. So the question from the audience, can we at least have time for one or two questions?
Hi, I'm actually one of those startups that we were talking about that you raised here, where the issue that we have is when there are data sets available where we can create innovation, but that innovation needs to be contributed then into the open source domain, we steer away from helping that patient community. And I was actually really interested to hear how the Fox Foundation came to the decision, because I believe that's what the policy states for your data. If I develop an innovation for Parkinson's patients using your data set, I have to contribute that innovation into the open domain.
I mean, the data set that we make available. Yeah, so in that particular study, I think the one you're talking about, it's a $100 million study that the foundation is funding. So that was sort of part of the concept, was that any discoveries, it's an open pre-competitive study, any discoveries made from that would be to benefit the community as a whole.
And just to tag on that, I hope others realize I'm enough in the area to be able to appreciate that type of stewardship, leadership shown by the Michael J. Fox Foundation is not necessarily the case across all patient advocacy research groups. It's very powerful, and for that reason, I think that the chance that patients with Parkinson's are going to get to some of the solutions sooner than others because of that type of leadership is primed. And I think the world is better off by people who are willing to take that.
Tomas?
Transparency Life Sciences. So I think I want to comment on two things. One is the dreaded word validation and the regulatory obstacles. So we're tackling the, if you think about healthcare being wasteful, and we are developing drugs, the drug development industry is wasteful 10 times or 100 times. And this is probably the biggest product of biotech, CRO, pharma industry is a waste. And all this $2.6 billion per compound is because 90% of it goes to fumes. So we're tackling that. Our aim is to reduce clinical development cost by 90%, because anything short than that is not worth doing. And talking about validation, we open source and crowdsource our clinical development protocols. And these are not DYO science, it's regulatory grade IND grade studies. Patients' insight is fantastic. It's all in the open. You can see what patients say on our website. So we give it away to everybody to replicate the same protocol. And we telemonitor patients in our clinical trials, which addresses the other question, regulatory versus validation. I haven't heard a single pushback from the FDA in terms of collecting data via telemedicine thus far, and we've done it 2 times, and we're doing it 3rd time. And next week, actually, we're meeting with the FDA with our 3rd pre-IND. So I think it's a myth that we need to wait for regulators to change, because my life is too short to wait for that. Within current regulations in drug development, there is a lot of room for being innovative. And the 3rd comment about investors reacting to us. The biotech investors don't understand because they don't see how that works. And IT investors say it's fabulous, but you're developing drugs next. So there is this, everybody is talking about convergence between IT or high tech and drug development, pharma, biotech. But it's from financial worlds, they see it completely differently. So I just encourage everybody to just do it and not wait to validate the technology, because if you want to validate technology in cycles, at least in drug development, you will never, these curves will never meet. One is years cycle, and the other one is weeks and days. Because if you start a trial today with today's technology, 12 months later you'll be ending it with technology that nobody's using. So you have to be adaptive how you do it. And it's fun to do, but it's quite interesting dynamics.
Last comment, Stephen.
Yeah, I'm just going to make one last comment, which is, I think I can do this. I'd like each of the panelists to give a one-sentence answer to the following question. I want to know what's an invitation that if someone has the following skill or sort of solution, that you'd actually be willing to talk to them after this panel. So what I'm saying is, what is it you really need? I'm not talking about money. What is it that you really need that if there's someone in the room who goes, I've got that, that you're willing to talk to them? Julian, what is it that's the real pressing need that you can't get right now that in this mobile health you think would help you out?
I think the hardest person to find is the person who has business insight and technology insight and can blend them together and talk like a human being.
I was going to say that we're working with Stephen and solve most of it until you got to the last part of the sentence. It's a hard question. I mean, I think we're trying to bridge somebody, I think, that has, to the last comment, the IT and the medical expertise to really bring that together, because those worlds don't really talk that well to each other.
Scott?
From our perspective, someone that has a therapy or therapies that they want to validate outside of a clinic, outside of a
that you're ready to talk to
physician.
them.
We're ready to talk to them.
Say a lawyer who can help us get aligned incentives across the ecosystem.
That's very good. Max?
I would say someone who can visualize 15,000 dimensional spaces and also understand neurobiology.
Yeah, and for me, I've wandered back into business schools where I'm very interested in people who are interested in behavioral psychology because I think engagement and experience in the apps is going to be really hard to do, and now I've got to go back and talk to business school people. Okay, with that, thanks everyone. Thanks.
Thank you very much. This has been a great panel, and I want to thank you for taking the time to explain all those issues. We'll be going